Welcome to A Cup of Gratitude with Amanda Schaefer. Hi, I'm your host, and I'm so glad you stopped by. This podcast is really for anyone, anywhere, anytime. And it's about taking a moment to slow down and look around and actually see all of the good things that are there. There's no question that asks, is your cup half empty or half full? But I think a better question is, what's in your cup? I mean, a drop of gratitude will benefit your life unimaginably more than a full cup of anything else. So let's settle in and take a look at how we can shift our focus and embrace the joy and the wonder of the life that we have. And once you start, you won't be able to stop seeing the good. And just like me, you won't be able to stop talking about it. And somehow that creates even more. Even in the midst of difficulty, even when it's really hard. Learn how to drink from a cup of gratitude.
Welcome. Today I am speaking with Tracy Crump. She dispenses hope in her devotional book, Health, Healing, and Wholeness, Devotions of Hope in the Midst of Illness, based on her experiences as an ICU nurse and caregiver. Tracy's book has garnered multiple awards, but she's best known for contributing 22 stories to Chicken Soup for the Soul books. Her course on writing for the series is one of the Series Writer Academy's top sellers. Tracy's articles and devotions have appeared in diverse publications, including Focus on the Family, Mature Living, Ideals, The Upper Room, Women's World, and Guideposts books. As coordinator of Right Life workshops, she conducts workshops, teaches at conferences across the country, and edits the Right Life newsletter. She's a freelance editor and proofreads for Farmers Almanac. And Tracy and her husband Stan live in North Mississippi. They homeschooled both their sons and now dote on 5 completely unspoiled grandchildren. She believes grandma is the most beautiful word in the English language. Welcome, Tracy. How are you today?
I'm fine, Amanda. Thank you. It's so good to be here.
I've really been looking forward to our conversation.
I am too.
So you have quite a litany of accomplishments for someone who's an aspiring writer. I think we hear that and we think, oh my goodness, how did she get there? And I love starting at the beginning of people's stories so we can really understand that it isn't just, hey, I set my goal on that thing and it happened, but it's this series of steps in a journey that God walks with us that gets us to the place where people see us now.
That's right. That's true. Really, I had no aspirations at all of becoming a writer. I like to say that I was raised at the hospital where my dad was a medical photographer for almost 30 years. And I went up to the hospital many times to visit his lab. This was before the age of digital cameras.
Right.
And so he had a dark room where he developed his own film, and it actually wasn't even film. It was huge plates that they used in these big cameras. Probably nobody would even recognize them anymore as a camera. But
Wow.
I enjoyed being up there and hearing the doctors talk about, their life there. And so from a young age, in fact, from the age of 10, I knew that I wanted to be a nurse.
Wow,
And
that's really awesome.
mm-hmm.
It's awesome that
So,
God kind of put you in a place because of what your dad was doing so that you could take a look around and see what it is you had desire to do in your life. And had he not been doing that, who knows, you might not have ever
that's
even
right.
been in a hospital.
That's true. That's true. And I think because I was in that kind of situation, not really, around sick people, I didn't associate hospitals with sickness and illness. And so
Yeah.
it was not, I lost any intimidation that I might have had of being at a hospital. So
Yeah.
it was just kind of natural for me to be there.
When you were there and you had this desire to become a nurse, like how did you get to that place from being there and having a good atmosphere, having good experiences? What drew you to nursing?
Well, I guess really it was more of a crisis experience that I had because when I was just slightly older than that, I had already decided that's what I wanted to do. But I had an accident at a Girl Scout meeting and ended up in the hospital for a couple of days. And I remember telling the nurses then that I want to be a nurse. I'm going to be a nurse one day. And I'm sure they all just nodded and thought, yeah, that's what everybody says. But it was ingrained in me by that time. And so I guess that's what really, I kind of got to see firsthand what the nurses were actually doing. And so I
Yeah,
put it together with what my desire was.
that's awesome. That's very cool. Now, you had told me during our pre-recording call that when you were about 11 years old, you asked your parents to go to church. I was wondering, what did they say?
Well, Amanda, I was raised in a very loving home, but it was not a Christian home. We were
Right.
taught high ideals and strong morals, but we didn't hear anything about Jesus. And
Hmm.
so I one day I just had this desire to go to church. Now I didn't know at the time, but I know now that it was the Holy Spirit drawing me.
That's right.
But I had friends who went to church, and so I asked my mom and dad, could we not start going to church? And they said, well, would you like to know what we believe? And I said yes. And so they sat me down and they explained that they were agnostic. And
Mm.
of course, I did not know what that meant. And the way they explained it was they said, well, there might be a God or there might not be a God, but it really
Wow.
doesn't make any difference to us. And I thought, that's really not what I believe. I looked around and I could just see God's hand in everything.
Yeah.
And so, but I was very fortunate that they were open to my going to church. And so for 2 years, 11 years of age, I walked myself for a block from our house to a church down the street.
Oh, wow.
And I really actually didn't start going to church. I went in the evenings to something called training union. And
Okay.
it's kind of like Sunday school at night. And there I was in a class of children my age, and I learned about Jesus. And I told them I was a Christian
Hmm.
because, in my mind, all you do is you decide that's what you want to be. So, okay, you're a Christian. I didn't know any better.
Yeah,
And yeah, so, I learned about Jesus, but I really, saying you're a Christian doesn't make you a Christian.
that's
Um,
right. That's right. But as a child, I love that
mhm,
that was your idea, that, well,
mhm,
that's what I think, so that's what I am. I mean, you were on the right track.
mhm. Right, right. Headed in the right direction anyway. Yeah.
You had also told me, would you share with everyone, what were the teachers' names of that class you went to?
Oh, I guess this was prophetic. It was Mr. and Mrs. Angel,
Yeah,
and they
I
were
love
the
that.
I know they were the sweetest couple, and so caring and encouraging, and they asked me. I know they asked me one time, did I want to be baptized? And I thought, do I want to get dunked in water? No, I don't want to do that. So, but they were very sweet, and I remember like going on sleepovers at their house and things like that. In fact, I don't think I told you this, Amanda, but just not long ago, I had called the church. It's actually a church that many people might recognize, Bellevue Baptist Church in Memphis, Tennessee. It's
Hmm.
where Dr. Adrian Rogers was later the pastor.
Yeah.
And I called the church about a book I had published and asked them about maybe carrying it there in their bookstore. And I talked to an older man, and I just basically told him my little testimony and told him, that the first church I ever went to was Bellevue Baptist Church.
Hmm.
And he said, and I told him about the angels, and he said, he said, they're still here. I
Oh my
said, you're kidding.
gosh.
He said, no, they're older than Noah, but he said they're still here. And
Oh,
that must have
wow.
been, I mean, that had to be 55 years ago that they were
Wow.
the leaders of that class. So
Wow.
I
That's
thought that was
amazing.
amazing.
That
Hmm.
is amazing. What a great story. I
Yeah.
just loved it when you told me their names were Mr. and Mrs. Angel. I thought, oh, God, you're so amazing.
Yeah, I
um,
know it. Well,
now,
I wanted to say this too. They instilled in
sure.
me. After 2 years, I kind of just dropped out, like a lot of kids do, whose parents do not encourage them to go to church.
Yeah.
But I kept reading my Bible, and
Oh, wow.
and so for before I was a voracious reader, and but by the time I was 17, I had read the Bible cover to cover twice.
Wow.
But, still I wasn't a Christian because reading your Bible doesn't make you a Christian.
That's right. And it's important that you keep making these little declarations along the way because it's true. You
Mhm,
can want to believe and you can read the word, but it's not until you really accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior that you're a Christian. And that encompasses a lot of different things within it. You have to understand that you're a sinner. You have to understand that he's God. You have to believe that, he's making a way for you back to God and that you couldn't have it on your own. It really has so many truths within it that I think we have to be older to understand. I know people my age and older that don't understand it, and I'm 58. So as a child, I think it's something that gets uncovered layer by layer as the Holy Spirit leads. So you did end up going to nursing school, and you told me that while you were there, you were invited to a crusade. So what happened there?
Well, that's right. I finally heard, I'm sure I'd heard it before, but it finally sank in that all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. And I thought, oh yeah, all means me too. And that God so loved the world that he made the way for us to, like you say, to be reconciled to him. And so that's when I really finally accepted Jesus. And I've often said that, I have kind of a boring testimony. I wasn't on drugs. I wasn't, a bad girl. I was always a pretty good girl, but you can't ever be good enough to come to God. And so it's only through Jesus that we can do that. And having a relationship, we're having a relationship with him. And so I say that I was in a dangerous place, because when we think we're good enough, we don't see a need to accept Jesus. We don't see a need for a way back to God. Yeah. And so, but he makes that way. And then, as long as we accept him and start forming that relationship with him, then we are actually a Christian at that point.
That's right. I don't think there's any such thing as a boring testimony. I've heard so many different stories, but like you said, we're all sinners. We all need Jesus, and we encounter that truth and choose it or don't choose it in different ways at different times of our life. But I think that every single story, when you dovetail them all together, only begins to show us the real story of the goodness of what Jesus did on the cross.
That's right. That's right.
And I think we need to hear every single one, because I know that your story is going to reach people that mine won't, and my story will reach people that yours won't. And as I said, I think we need to hear all the stories. We're told to tell them. And I think too many people haven't shared, and we're missing these beautiful witnesses of the love and compassion of God.
That's true. That's true, Amanda.
And they're inspiring to me. I mean, this is so encouraging to me to hear story after story of God's goodness. And, for me, it's such a blessing. And to be able to share that is even more of a blessing.
I agree.
Now, you ended up working in the ICU, and you got married. And you told me that you always desired to be a stay-at-home mom. Did you get to do that? And if you did, what was that like for you?
I did. After I worked for 5 years in ICU, but when I became pregnant with our first child, I retired, and people asked me why are you quitting nursing? Why are you not going to nurse anymore? And I said, well, I love nursing. I do love it, but I have a more important job to do. I felt like raising my children was the most important thing that I could do. And so I was very fortunate that I could do that. Not that times weren't a little bit tough on one income, and I know it's even harder to do today, but it was something that I was so important to me to be able to be there for my children, at each step of the way as they grew. Yeah. And really, God's timing is so wonderful, because, and this had nothing to do really with being a stay-at-home mom, but shortly after I quit, and before I had our first son, my grandmother, she became very ill. She had cancer, and it came back and had metastasized to her brain. So I was Thank you. But I was able to be there with her for those last few weeks before our son was born. And had I been working, then I wouldn't have been able to do that. My mom was still working. And so I, basically filled in for her during the day while she couldn't take care of my grandmother. But it's just, I just love to watch God's hand in everything, that he has everything under control.
That's
And
right.
even though we may not understand it, his timing is perfect.
That's right. And that's beautiful that you had that experience because that was your only opportunity to have it. And
Mhm.
different seasons and different changes in our lives, when we look back on them, we see so many more things than maybe when they're first changing, and maybe we're even not so sure about the change. You were looking forward to yours. When I moved in here to take care of my parents, I really didn't know what to expect. It was during a pandemic. It was,
Mm, yes.
a complete life change. Everything was upside down. But as the dust settled and as I leaned into what did God have for me in this, in addition to caring for them, which was, a way to glorify him for sure, to honor them. But he also had this podcast for me and,
Mhm.
this way for me to share, even though I was restricted. So there's always some kind of blessing that if
Mhm.
you just stop and look around that God has for you in every season and every situation. So I'm so glad you got to have that time with her. What a blessing that is.
Mhm. And I love that you talk about gratefulness too, Amanda, because, even though that's not something moving in with your parents and making all those changes, because you made some pretty major changes, and
Yeah.
that's not something we necessarily think of being grateful for, but we can find something, like you say, the
Yep.
blessings in every situation. And just like with my grandmother, I wouldn't have wanted her to go through what she went through, but I was grateful
Mhm.
that I could be there with
Yeah,
her.
absolutely. Absolutely. It's really a matter of choice. I always say that
Mm.
for me, gratitude is my only like, good response to the grace that I've received. It's really the only right response, but it's also a discipline, and I get to choose whether I have it or not.
Mhm.
And in the Bible, it talks about we can choose a blessing or a curse. And I think when we choose
Mm.
to be grateful for the good things that are around us, despite whatever our circumstances are, then we're choosing the blessing. And when we choose to be bitter, or angry, or rebellious to the things going on around us, then we're choosing a curse. And it's up to us. It always has been, even since the Garden of Eden. Um,
That's
God
true.
gave us that choice, and that choice actually is something that's so beautiful because without that choice, we could never really love him back. He could have made a bunch of robots that just did whatever he said, but that's not what he wanted.
That's true. Yeah, I agree. And I remember a poster that I used to read all the time that said, "Attitude is the paintbrush that colors every situation."
Oh,
And I
wow. I
think
love
that
that.
I do too. I think it's our attitude that, as you say, determines whether we're grateful or whether we're angry about a certain situation. So I think, as you say,
Absolutely.
it's all up to us. Hmm.
Absolutely. I mean, I started choosing gratitude at one of the worst times of my life. So, um, you know, it only goes to prove that really, I think a lot of people hear the title of my podcast, and until they get to know me or hear some of the episodes, they think like, oh, everything must be wonderful for you. No,
Hmm.
not necessarily wonderful, but the joy of the Lord is my strength, and
Yes.
perspective changes everything. So I'm totally in agreement. Now,
Hmm.
being home with the kids, was it everything that you thought it was going to be? Did you enjoy it? What was it like teaching your children? You ended up homeschooling. Was that part of
I
the
did.
plan?
Absolutely not. No, I say that God was gracious to go along with my plans for a
Hmm.
while, and then
Hmm.
He threw wrenches into the works, and He was one who convinced me to homeschool. It was our kids actually started out in school. Our older son was in sixth grade
Hmm.
when his one of his teachers, he rotated among three teachers, and one of them was arrested for
Oh,
having an
wow.
affair. Yes, for having an affair with a middle school or a junior high school boy.
Oh,
And
my
so,
goodness.
yes, it was a big deal. And
Hmm.
but I thought, well, this is okay, she's out of the picture. But the thing was, they couldn't actually fire her because she had not been convicted yet. And so they had one substitute after another. And you know how sixth graders, that's a
Yeah.
tough age anyway.
Yeah.
And they took full advantage of having substitute teachers. And the class just kind of went wild. And so things I didn't realize at the time, but things were getting worse and worse. And
Mm-hmm.
our son was starting to have like tummy aches in the morning and other, he didn't want to go to school. He
Yeah.
complained of not being able to hear what the teacher said. And so finally, my husband at one point said, well, do you think we need to pull him out and homeschool him? And I said, no, we don't need to do anything that drastic. I'll go talk to the principal and everything will
Mhm.
be okay. And
Yeah.
so finally, God just dropped me into the middle of the situation. The science teacher asked me if I would sit with her class while she ran the science fair. And so I said, okay. I thought, well, no problem. I'll take a good book and we'll read and we'll do this. And oh my goodness, I saw for myself, I couldn't even make myself heard above the kids. There were some of
Wow.
the kids I couldn't even keep in the room. Things had gotten so out of hand.
Oh,
And
wow.
so I went home that day and I called my husband. I said, you're right. We need to pull him out. So we just planned to do it temporarily to get him through that year. We found out that the principal had assured me that they were being kept on schedule with their learning and all that, their education. I found out that was as far from the truth as could be, that they were way behind
Yeah.
in those two subjects that teacher had taught. And so, and the other teachers were even having trouble controlling students because they got out of hand in that class. And so it just, leached over into the other classes.
Oh, it sounds horrible. It
So,
sounds like the Lord of the Flies. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
They had taken over. That's true.
Yeah.
So
Now, what
mhm.
about your other son? Your other son didn't have any of that. Did he end up getting homeschooled as well?
He did. He was in first grade at the time, and this was like in March that we pulled our older son out. So we left him where he was. He had a good situation, a good teacher.
Mhm.
But by the time school was about to start that next year, one time I went in to our younger sons, and we had planned. We had made all plans to put our older son back into school.
Right.
But I went into our younger son's room one night and he was having trouble going to sleep. And I said, what's the matter? Are you, is something on your mind? And he said, well, Mama, I was just thinking I'd like for you to homeschool me too.
Oh.
And it just kind of broke my heart. He was my kind of ADHD child. And
Mhm.
so he was already starting to have a little bit of trouble, staying on task and that sort of thing. And this was just first grade. So I
Right.
knew it would probably just get worse. And so I thought, well, maybe we need to look into this. And we started, I talked to some friends who homeschooled their children and so talked to my husband and we finally made the decision to pull them out to just try it, just try it. But we ended up homeschooling them both for the entire rest of their education and loved it. It
Wow.
was it was wonderful.
Wow, that's
And like
awesome. Now, you teach now, and so I was wondering, what do you think God was doing in that time? Like, how did he prepare you for writing and teaching writing in this part of your life?
Yeah. Well, I had to learn to teach the different learning styles.
Mm.
Both our sons, our older son was a visual learner, and that's what I am. So it wasn't as hard for me to teach him because he
Mhm.
learned the same way that I learned. But our younger son was very hands-on. He's a kinesthetic learner, and
Right.
I had to be really creative and inventive to help him learn the way he needed to learn. And so we did a lot of hands-on stuff. We did a lot of teaching outside the classroom, a lot of field trips and things where he learned that way. So I think that was a good preparation for teaching because, even as adults, we have different learning styles. And so,
Absolutely.
yes. And
Yeah.
so I try to incorporate all the different, like, teaching to auditory, visual, and kinesthetic. So I try to teach to those different learning styles. And plus, I used to kid that, I didn't know if my kids were learning anything, but I was learning a lot. I loved it. And I was always good at grammar, but you get rusty after a while. So it was a lot of
Yeah.
good review in that, and I think that probably prepared me for writing. So
Yeah.
there are a
And
lot
you
of
edit, so it makes
yes,
a good editor as well.
That's right.
A lot of
That's
people
right.
nowadays, they just have applications on their computer that go in and fix everything. And but unfortunately, we have a whole bunch of people that don't know how to really construct a sentence correctly and how to do grammar, how to spell right. You know, it's really funny. You would think we've learned so many things, and we've gone so far with the internet and with technology, but I think we've also kind of shot ourselves in the foot in some areas. I think that's one of them.
And even those computer applications are not going to catch everything.
No,
So
no.
it's yes, you need to review. You need to learn
You do. It's
the
funny.
craft.
I just posted today a funny memory on my Instagram account from when I was working on a book, and I was doing just that. I was going through and editing my work for like the billionth time. I had crowd edited with my family. I had used software. I'd done all the things, right? And I'm reading this piece, this little paragraph that was very serious, right? And it should have said something about going down so far, but what it said was it went down so fart.
Oh no.
And I laughed and I laughed and I laughed. I fixed it and then I laughed and I laughed some more. And I shared it to remind people that, you know what, first of all, we have to laugh at ourselves. We can't be so serious. But second of all, you know, that we really do have to kind of take a good look at everything and make sure everything's in place, because fart is a real word. So of course, probably
It
didn't
didn't
catch
flag it.
right? You know, so I was laughing so hard I thought I'd hopefully give some other people a giggle. But truly, it's important to have another set of eyes, if not many other sets of eyes, when you're editing your work.
Oh, I agree completely. Yes, I do workshops on critique groups and that sort of thing. So yes, I agree completely.
Now, you've contributed to some very well-known publications. Do you still contribute?
I do. I'm probably doing more editing than writing these days, but
Yeah.
I do try to. I've published quite a bit in Chicken Soup for the Soul,
Mm-hmm.
and they have they have quite a few call outs now, and so I share those with our newsletter subscribers,
Yeah, I
and
just
I encourage.
subscribed. I've been
Oh,
seeing
good.
them, and yeah, I'm thinking about doing one here or there. I'm excited.
Great. That's great. And so I do continue to contribute. I haven't had anything published the last couple of years. It's been so intense with caregiving and like I say, I do a lot of editing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I do have we do workshops. We haven't, of course, the last couple of years we haven't been able to do these because of COVID. But
Right.
we do a hands-on workshop on writing for Chicken Soup for the Soul. It's called Stirring the Pot, Writing for Chicken Soup for the Soul, and
Oh,
we'd
cool.
love to do that. Yeah, a friend and I will actually even travel within 5 hours of the Memphis area to put those on. People sometimes will partner with us
Oh,
and
that's
find a
great.
location.
That's
And so
great.
we really enjoy doing that. And then
How
go ahead.
how did you first get published? I had said in the beginning, I think people hear you've done all of these amazing things and they just assume that this is what you always wanted to do, which you've told us it was not. And, that this is just what you aspired to and you just put your nose to the grindstone and that's how you got there. But how did you first get published?
Well, the first thing I did was I had written about, I actually wrote a whole book
Hmm.
about a situation, a family issue.
Hmm.
And I felt like God wanted me to share that, but I had no idea what to do with it. I
Right.
was green as grass and had no idea what to do. And so I actually put that away for about 4 years.
Hmm.
And then I received a card in the mail advertising a writers conference. It was a Christian writers conference. And I thought, okay, Lord, if this is what you want me to do, I'll do this. And I had just planned to, take that manuscript down there and hand it off to a willing publisher. And then I was going to be done with this writing stuff because I was not a writer. And so I had no plans to do that. In fact, I
Hmm.
hated writing when I was in school. But
Wow.
I went down there and I got some interest in the manuscript itself, but I also met a couple of magazine editors, and they were interested in the topic and had me write articles for those. And so came back home and did that, submitted those, and they were published in national magazines. And I actually got paid for it. I thought, well, this is pretty cool. And so, so it kind of went from there. And I continued writing some articles. And then I joined a writers group headed up by a lady who was a former nurse herself. And one day she emailed me and she said, well, Chicken Soup for the Soul has a call out for a nurse's soul book. And she said, why don't you try submitting something? She knew I had worked as a nurse many years before.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh gosh, they're not gonna publish anything I write. They're the biggest selling series in publishing history. You know, they're not going to publish anything for me. And
Right.
so I just let the deadline pass. And she emailed a few days later and she said, Chicken Soup for the Soul has extended the deadline on the Nurse's Soul book. She said, why don't you try submitting something? And I thought, well, gosh, it was so long ago. And so finally I thought of one story and then another. And
Mm-hmm.
I ended up submitting 5 stories to that book, and they chose 2 to publish. And so that's how
Wow.
I first got published in Chicken Soup for the Soul. And I tell other people, if I can do it, you can do it. Because I
That's
had not
awesome.
only had no plans to write for Chicken Soup for the Soul, I had no plans to be a writer, period.
Well, you
So
need
it,
to send that friend a little thank you note every year because really, what a good friend, you know. And I think it's awesome that God extended the deadline, you know, gave you another shot at
mhm,
it.
that's right. That's right.
Now, writing something shorter, like the magazine articles or a piece for Chicken Soup for the Soul, is that different than when you wrote your book? What was that like for you?
It is, and actually, I enjoy that more. I have written short pieces since 2000. I've published short pieces since 2005, so
Mm-hmm.
that's been my mainstay. And
Yeah,
I like that because I can finish something and then move on to something else
yeah.
different. And so you never get bored, you never get tired of it, and there's always something new to explore. I started writing short devotions,
Mm-hmm.
and submitted to places like Upper Room and The Secret Place. And I've eventually wound up writing pretty much on a regular basis for some guidepost books.
Awesome.
And so, yeah, so that's been a lot of fun. But I did end up eventually writing an entire book, and how that came about was I met an agent at a conference. I was on faculty there, and he was too. And so I ended up sitting down with him, and I had a couple of ideas for novels, for a couple of novels, and I was kind of toying with that, and I told him
Mhm.
those, and he said, "Well, that's fine," but he said, "Really," he said, "nonfiction sells better than fiction." He said, "You've published so many devotions." He said, "Why don't you try writing a devotional book?" And I thought,
Mhm.
well, I could do that. And I thought, that's not something so intimidating because it's one devotion at a time, and I'm used to doing
Right,
short
right.
pieces.
Yeah.
So, so that's what I ended up doing, was writing a devotional book, and enjoyed it. I think the bane of writer's existence, though, is marketing. People don't realize it's not just writing the book
That's
that you've got.
right. Yeah.
Nowadays, you've got to do your own marketing. So
Mhm.
that was an eye, well, not so much an eye opener. I knew that was the case, but it was a learning experience. It was a learning curve for
Yeah.
me to learn how to do that. But if you're not growing, if you're not improving, if you're not changing, then you're just stuck in a rut. So
That's true. That's true. That's a
Mhm.
powerful statement because I think so many of us want to do something or we dream about doing something, but we're not comfortable stepping out and doing something we've never done before. And I always tell people I don't have a comfort zone anymore. God has just completely, broken me of that over the past several years. And since I stopped kind of being intimidated or saying no or not right now, the world has
Mhm.
been so exciting. And I think, oh boy, I probably could have been doing this a long time ago and having so much fun, So definitely
Mhm.
get out there and do the thing you want to do. Try it. What's the worst that can happen? You learn from it.
That's right. And so many writers want to be writers, but they don't write. To
Yes.
be a writer, you've got to sit down and write, not just talk about it, not just learn about it.
Yeah, that's a famous quote. I think Hemingway said it, writers write.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so succinct, but it's so true. And anyone that I know who's really a writer is constantly journaling, constantly storytelling one way or another, and writing it down and looking back over it and getting new truths out of it, and just always engaging in their own life. And then from there, it just could be anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
Now, you also have been quite the caregiver for people in your family, and we really bonded over that in our pre-recording call. Could you share what was it like caring for your parents? Would you tell the story for me, so the listeners could hear it, about the way you advocated for your mother, specifically with a neurologist, to perform a test that ended up improving her life immensely?
Sure. Well, my dad had been in poor health for years, and I honestly thought he would be the one who would pass away before my mom, because she cared for him. And for a long while, I was not really involved with their care much at all.
Mhm.
She was fully capable, and he had multiple cardiac and pulmonary and intestinal issues. He was just, I mean, he had a lot of health issues.
Mhm.
But then she suddenly started declining. Her memory was not good. She had
Mhm.
been a voracious reader too. She would read a book a day sometimes, and she got to the point where she couldn't concentrate long enough to finish
Mhm.
a book. And so we started going. I knew something was wrong, and we started going to doctors. And one neurologist did just a kind of a cursory memory test on her, and he just said she's got dementia, just right in front of her. And
Wow.
but I knew something more was wrong, because she had some other symptoms too that didn't make sense. Didn't with dementia. Didn't you know? Didn't wasn't a part of dementia, and
Right.
so she would like lean to one side or lean forward when she and did not even realize she was leaning, and
Mhm.
she later began falling, and just like I say, just a whole lot of issues. And all during this time, Amanda, I was just in turmoil, because I was a nurse, so I should be able to figure this out, and we should be able to
Right.
get something done. And
Right.
we were going from one doctor to another, but all night long, each night, I would just lie awake and think, now what's going on? And I would pray, and I would, how we do, I would hand it over to God, and then I would think, oh, we haven't checked this, and I would just take it right back and do this over and over and over again. And I said, Lord, please give me the answer. Show me what we need to do, because I know something else is wrong.
Right.
And finally, one night, this had been going on for about a month, at least a month. And one night I said, Lord, I don't know. I don't know what else to do. I'm done. I can't figure this out. Lord, I need your wisdom. I need you to do something. I'm just going to give this, I can't do it. I'm going to give this over to you. And
Mhm.
so I felt a peace that night, and I finally started falling asleep. And all of a sudden, three words came to my mind, and they probably won't make any, any sense to anyone else. But I remembered a friend who years before had gone through something similar with his dad. And the three words that came to mind were normal pressure hydrocephalus. And I
Mhm.
thought, because that's what his dad had had. And I thought, And so the next morning I started researching it, and she had all the symptoms. And
Wow.
so the next visit, I approached the neurologist and I said, do you think she could have this? And he said, no. And I said, why not? And he said, because her MRI doesn't show it. But I had done my homework, and I found that it's not always definitive. The MRI isn't. And
Mhm.
so I said, well, isn't there another test that you can do? And he said, well, he kind of backed up, and he said, well, yeah, but you'd have to go to a neurosurgeon. And I said, well, okay. And so so we did.
Mhm.
And by the time we got there, I'm telling you, she was about to the point where she couldn't walk. She
Wow.
could hardly answer one or two words to a question. She couldn't make any normal conversation, and her memory was just nil. And so
Wow.
I asked the doctor, I said, do you think she could have normal pressure hydrocephalus? And he said, no. And I said, why not? He said, because the MRI doesn't show it. I thought, deja vu, we have been here before. And so I said, well, isn't there a specialized test you can do? And he said, well, yeah, if you really want to do that. And it's not a pleasant test, but he kind of
Right.
made me feel like I was a bad daughter for asking for it. But
Mm.
we finally got that test done, and it showed that that's what she had, which is a
Wow.
treatable condition, whereas, they can do very little for Alzheimer's and
That's right.
dementia. So she had a shunt inserted, which made drastic improvements, and she made a miraculous turnaround. And I
Wow.
say to this day that that was God's miracle, that He gave me that answer of what was wrong with her. Because she was literally, she was on her way to the grave.
Wow.
And,
That is
and she would,
a powerful story. And
Mhm.
the way you advocated and every time, no. Okay, well, no. And that's what happens sometimes. I
Mhm.
think we get put in positions in our family with different members where somebody is kind of putting a blockade and telling us
Mhm.
you can't do anything else there. And if we're going to God, and we do, I love that you talked about the struggle, but that you did finally let go. And it was when you let go and you had the peace that He gave you the answer. I think that was pretty powerful. But
Mhm.
yeah, God gets the glory for that, because you had
Mhm.
tried and tried and tried and thought and thought and thought, and yet it was the advocate spirit in you, the love for your mom, that didn't want to give up and thought that there was something else, that you also gave over to God when you gave Him the situation. And so I just love that story. That's why I wanted you to share it. And to God be all the glory. That's amazing, because literally she went from barely able to do anything to having such
Mhm.
immense improvement. And I'm sure it changed the end of her life.
It did. We had her for another 3 years. Now, she never fully regained her mobility or some of her functions. She was not able to completely care for herself again, or for Dad.
Hmm.
And so we got caregivers in to help care for them, and we had a long season of caregiving there. But we had my
Yeah.
mom back for 3 years, and I was very grateful for that.
Wow. Now, during the time you cared for them and had all of that going on, at one point you told me that both of them were in the hospital at the same time. What
That's
happened there? What
right.
was that like?
Well, that was an experience. Well, my dad, we had kind of rocked along. Like I said, we got caregivers, and we kind of got our routine, in our groove there, and we went along for about 2.5, a little more years, when my
Hmm.
dad developed appendicitis, and he had to go into the hospital, and then he had complications after
Mm.
surgery, and he just started a downhill slide. He ended up on dialysis. He went into kidney
Oh,
failure on
wow.
dialysis. His doctor really did not think he was going to survive, but for 3 months he went back and forth between the hospital and rehab. And of course, all that time I was trying to stay up there with him and advocate for him,
Hmm.
but at the same time trying to make sure my mom was taken care of, because my dad had, even though he was in poor health, he was still kind of able to look after my mom in the evening, between the time that the caregivers left and the time I came and got her ready for bed and got her into bed. So, we had to have caregivers around the clock
Wow.
once he was in the hospital. And so, and then at one time, then she eventually started declining again.
Yeah.
And she had to go into the hospital for, I guess it was, I don't know, 5 to 7 days that she was in the hospital. And so I was just riding the elevators back and forth between their
Ah,
floors and trying to keep up with what was going on with both of them. So
wow.
it was a real time. But she eventually, she passed away. We had ended up putting her on hospice while my dad was still in rehab, and she passed away while he was still in rehab.
Oh,
And
wow.
he came home the day after her funeral, on oxygen and dialysis 3 days a week, wound care, physical therapy, home health.
Oh,
So I
my
had no
goodness.
time to grieve. I had to jump right back into intense caregiving with him. And
Can
so it
you can
was.
you imagine if you had not chosen to be a nurse?
Mhm. It did make it easier that I knew, and like I said, like you say, I was able to advocate and everything. But
Yeah.
taking care of someone at home, and especially your own parents, is still a whole nother ball game, as I'm
Oh,
sure
you are
you know very
preaching to the
well.
choir. Yes, it is. I mean,
Yes.
all medical issues aside, there's all of the emotional issues and all of the things from growing up and all the different things that you were able to kind of separate from and make your own choices in your own life, and now you're back and all of those dynamics are at work again, and most of them have not changed, even if you've worked on things yourself. So yeah, it can be really difficult. I can only imagine. And there's two of them and one of you, and that's the whole other thing.
Yes, that's true.
I mention that to them a lot when we're talking, and my parents have been together, married for 68 years, and so they finish each other's sentences, but not always in a healthy way. And so sometimes I'll just say, look, if I'm talking to mom, if my dad starts to answer, you can't say we or I'm not talking to you right now. I will get to you in a moment. And I've had to be really clear with boundaries because it's crazy, you spend that many years with someone. I'm really not sure that they know where one ends and the other begins at this point. And they grew up as only children, and they were married for such a long time. And it just makes it so difficult. So one of the things that I started doing was preparing them for when maybe they're not going to be as in good shape as they are now, and trying to make sure that we have routines that are very healthy and that I'm helping in ways that maybe they don't 100% need at the moment, but they're getting there, so that when they need it, they'll already be kind of in that frame of mind. And I was talking to someone recently about, when we're raising our children, we prepare them so that they know to listen to our voice, right? So if something is going to happen, like a ball's going to roll out in the street, if you yell stop or no, they will. And if we don't do that, then they could get harmed, right? Well, it's the same thing. We have to start preparing them to, you're now the one that they have to listen to. You're not the child anymore. And it's a strange transference.
That role reversal is hard. It is.
Because you still want to give them as much respect and freedom and everything as possible, but you also are now the one who has to make the big picture decisions.
Yeah,
now
that's right.
I'm so sorry for your loss, and that must have been really difficult, literally having him come home the day after her funeral. And I just so appreciate the caregiving part of your heart. You also cared for your mother-in-law, and she came to live with you when she was 98.
Yeah, well, she was actually 96 when she first moved in with us.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But
okay.
No, that's all right. And but she had lived on her own. My husband's dad had died when he was just 7 months old, and she never remarried. So she had lived on her own for, oh gosh, 70 years, probably, yeah,
Wow.
60, 70 years, yeah. And so, when we first said, and she was very independent, but we knew she was having some problems.
Yeah.
And so when I first said, I really think you need to come home with us. We were at her house, and we just celebrated my husband's birthday. And I said, we could look around and see she wasn't taking care of things like she normally did. And so when I said, I think we need to go to the doctor, she had not seen a doctor in 20 years. She was on no prescription medications. I think this is probably why she lived as long as she did. But she was, she had been doing great, but we knew she needed some help. And so when I said, I think you need to come home with us, and she didn't argue with me, I knew something was wrong.
Yeah.
So we took her to the doctor, found out she was having some thyroid issues, and the medication made a big difference. And she wanted to try to go back and live on her own again. And we tried that for a few weeks, but it didn't work. We could see she needed too much help. And so we moved her in, which was a big adjustment for all of us. It was a big adjustment for her because she'd been a loner for a long time, and she liked her independence.
Yeah.
So it was a big adjustment, but you just have to make those adjustments. It's just part of the game, and it's part of life. And so we did, and things went fine, and she was in amazingly good health for her age. For most of those 4 years. And of course, we had wanted to, I had always thought, well, gosh, if she turns 100, we want to throw a huge party. Well, of course, COVID got in the way of that.
Yeah.
But we had, a little party here for her and had our children, her grandchildren in. And then she got to see some of her nieces that she hadn't seen in a long time. We had a little patio party out there, with them. And everything was going great. I heard her telling somebody on the phone, she said, I've just partied all month long. She said, it's just been great. And so she was doing well. And then 12 days after her 100th birthday, she had a heart attack.
Oh.
And yeah, and she survived the heart attack. We brought her home. But the doctor eventually said there's just nothing more I can do for her. She got weaker and weaker. We ended up having to put her on hospice. And Amanda, I honestly didn't think that she would last a week after we put her on hospice.
Wow.
But she lived another 3.5 months. And so we had some long months of intense caregiving because it was like having a child, like having a baby in the house again, because we were getting up at night with her and feeding her, hand feeding her, and just doing everything, cleaning her and everything for her. And be getting up at night, it wore us out, honestly, because we weren't 20 somethings anymore, with babies. We were 60 something.
Yeah.
So it was hard. But we were so grateful that she was here with us, especially all that time that after COVID started. I was so grateful she was not in a nursing home. Because
that's so essential, because so many people ended up passing away earlier or being cut off from their family and being by themselves.
That's right. So, yeah, so we were just so grateful that we could care for her here at home.
Yeah, that's beautiful that you're able to do that. How do you think God uses that part of your heart now, that advocate, caregiver part of you?
Well, it's funny you ask that, because I just started a blog for caregivers.
Really?
Hoping, yeah. So hoping that I could share some things that might help other people, because I know so many people are caregiving now. So it's called Caregivers Corner. And I've just posted a few times, and I'm hoping that other people will maybe share some things and maybe you could do this too, Amanda. Share some things that you've learned. It's just going to be very short, once a month. But we need a community. We really do.
I agree.
It's such an isolating thing to be a caregiver.
Yeah.
And it's so, as much as we want to do it, as much as our hearts want to be with our family and help them, it is still very intense and stressful. And so
I think that's a great idea.
And really, a book for caregivers may be next on the agenda too. A devotional book for caregivers. I'm hoping
that was the next thing I was going to ask you, if you had any more books like in mind, and that all makes so much sense. You really went through those experiences for a reason, and you're also a writer, whether you liked it or not. And and I think it's really wonderful. I think community is such a big part of this caregiving piece, and I think so many people during the pandemic ended up in caregiving roles that they didn't expect. Even moms that were, used to go to work and now they're at home and their kids are at home, and there's just
schooling.
So many people that you can relate to between taking care of your kids with homeschooling and being a caregiver. I think that's great. And I very much see the advocate in you from the very beginning of your story. It just seemed like that's always who you were. And so I see you working in areas where you're walking out your purpose, and then storytelling about it and connecting to people from those places. And so I love how God's using the gifts he's given you.
Yes, and I'm so grateful for that too.
Now, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you if you could give any aspiring writers out there advice, what would it be?
Well, I think I'd have to say start small, because that's what I did. So many people think that you have to publish a book to be a writer. But, a surgeon doesn't start by doing brain surgery. He starts by stitching a cut on the finger or something. They start small and you learn along the way. It's like if your end goal is to write a memoir, then start by writing Chicken Soup for the Soul stories. They are true inspirational stories. And even if they're not published, you with every bit of writing you do, you learn something. You learn how to improve. And so, write a Chicken Soup for the Soul story. If you want to write a devotional book, well, write a single devotion and see if you can get it published. Write for Upper Room. They accept, just individual submissions. So do something like that and hone your style along the way. That, and these small pieces, I just don't think that starting small should be despised, because you learn to hone your craft. Hone your, you develop your own style, your own voice. If you've never heard of that, that's a thing that writers talk about, having their voice. And publishing little pieces gives you credibility. So if you're going to want to publish a book in some particular field or, topic, then publishing these little articles and other things, that gives you credibility. It shows that you know what you're talking about. And I can tell you, it sure is an encouragement too when you've got something published. That will boost your ego when you get something published and make you want to try again and try to do more. So
that's
start
awesome.
small.
That's awesome advice, and it's biblical, like you said. In Zechariah, it says, "Do not despise these small beginnings, because the Lord rejoices when Zerubbabel picked up, when he picked up the tools to do the work." And I think like that's really what God's asking of us. Like, hey, I gave you this talent. I'm really excited when you pick up all the things to go and do it. Just start small, and that's a beginning. That's really important. Like, he rejoices over your beginnings, your small beginnings. So I think that's great advice, and I think it's wonderful that we can be reminded how important just starting is.
That's right. Just taking that first step.
Yeah. Now, my last question is my favorite question. Anyone who listens knows. I really do just love the answers. So if you could give your younger self any advice, what would that be?
Oh, gosh. Oh, goodness. Probably to not be so hard-headed. I feel like I was hard-headed toward Jesus and not accepting him right away. But it takes a while. It takes some of us a little longer to realize that I'm a sinner too, and yes, I do need Jesus too. And I was pretty hard-headed and not wanting to homeschool. But I'm telling you, it was the biggest blessing in our lives. I would not have missed those years with our sons for anything. And then, of course, I never wanted to be a writer, so I was a little hard-headed there. And, 17 years later, here I am still writing and still loving it. So I guess my best advice to myself would be not be so hard-headed. You could have done this, a lot longer if you'd just not been so hard-headed.
Well, that's very good advice. And, I mean, I think we don't always know what's going to bring us fulfillment, especially when we're younger and we're growing up. And I think it's great that you eventually ended up doing all the things that God had for you. And yeah, that's great advice. But I think sometimes we grow some strengths as we're figuring it out and wrestling with God as well. So I'm sure you still got some good stuff out of it. But yeah, I wish I wasn't as hard-headed either. It took me a lot longer. I didn't come to Jesus until it'll be 21 years in May, and I'll be 58 in May. So I spent more of my life not with him. Yeah, absolutely. So I know a thing or two about that.
But I love the story of the workers in the fields and the ones who came late in the day. Got just as much blessing as the ones who came early. So
yeah, that's right.
That's wonderful.
And he took me from this really quiet, anxious, timid person who was very introverted even, to now I'm like this gregarious person that can't stop talking about Jesus and sharing in every way I can come up with. So it gives him glory, because certainly people that knew me before are like, wait a minute.
They see the change.
That's right. This is definitely Christ in me. People that know me now will not believe that I used to be quiet and timid and anxious. Well, just
That's
talk to my
wonderful.
family. Well, Tracy, it has just been such a pleasure to talk to you today. And thank you so much for taking the time to share your story with us. And I am so encouraged by all that you're continuing to do and all that God has brought you through and done with your life. I think that just your heart shows in everything that you've done. And even if you were hard-headed, God got through. You've done some amazing things. And I'm just happy to know you. I just felt very much a kindred spirit when we talked before. So I feel like I have a new friend, and I love that my family keeps growing as I do this podcast. And it's such a blessing.
Well, you are a blessing to me too, Amanda. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much. And hopefully I'll be talking with you again soon. And I hope you have an amazing day.
Hey, so I just want to thank you so much for spending your time with me. And I want to challenge you to go out today and to just take notice and to stop and really look around and find at least one good thing, one thing to be thankful for. You know, if you do that today, you're going to find so many more things tomorrow without even trying. Because once you start, you begin to see what's always been there. And if you need a refill, you can come join me again for another cup. Make sure to subscribe and have an awesome day and go be grateful.